So let me talk a little bit about what was happening in the 1920s and 30s as white evangelicals were growing in power and prominence. And I'll try to be careful with my language. I'll probably use the terms fundamentalist and evangelical interchangeably. I tend to use the terms that they use for themselves. So in the 20s and 30s, they called themselves fundamentalists. In the 1940s to today, they tend to call themselves evangelicals, but it's the same group, same people. Many of them are exactly the same if you trace them from the 1930s to the 1950s. But what they believed is the way they were reading their Bibles, they thought that you could see signs that the Bible had laid out, especially in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament, a series of events that would tell us when we were living near the rise of the Antichrist in this great apocalypse. And some of them were kind of hard to track. Things like loosening morals, the rise of Darwinian evolution. They were worried about women's suffrage and women getting new rights in the 1920s. They were worried that prohibition wasn't being enforced. But far more important and much more interesting to me, they were also closely watching global events. They were excellent students of foreign affairs, better than almost any other group of Americans. They understood what was happening in Europe and Asia and Africa and just around the world. And they had laid out a number of expectations in the 1880s and 1890s that they were preaching and preaching and preaching. And then in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, they began to see some of these predictions fulfilled. One of the important ones was the rise of a new restored Roman Empire. They believed that one of the things that would herald the end times was a revitalized Rome. And so when they saw Mussolini consolidating power, taking power, expanding his influence, for them, this was a huge sign that they were living near the end times. They also looked at what Hitler was doing, and they were very conscious of Hitler's anti-Semitism. A number of them had read Mein Kampf in German before Hitler came to power in 1933, and they believed that another sign of the end times would be the return of Jews to Palestine. And so they saw Hitler as facilitating that. They didn't necessarily support it or endorse it or cheer it, but they believed that God was using Hitler to move Jews back to Palestine to help set the stage for the Battle of Armageddon, which would literally happen in Palestine. So all of this stuff is going on in the background, which then takes us to Franklin Roosevelt. They looked at him and they understood him then in the context of all of these other things going on. And there's no doubt that his campaign in 1932 got off to an ominous start. On the first set of ballots at the Democratic National Convention, Roosevelt received 666 votes. When I first read that in the Fundamentalist magazine, I thought it was too good to be true. Like that couldn't really be true. And I went back and looked at the DNC records, and sure enough, that was absolutely the case. So this already set fundamentalists on edge, believing that there's something weird going on here that's linking Roosevelt to the Antichrist. After the election, then, they began to view Roosevelt in the same light as other totalitarian leaders. And I often talk to my students about this, that Roosevelt has become such a revered person in American history, mostly because of World War II, that Americans don't realize how much those who hated Roosevelt in the 30s really, truly despised him, just couldn't stand him.